You know, sometimes I look at the world map or I just scroll through the news and it feels like absolute random chaos.
Oh, completely. It's overwhelming.
Right. Because you look at a place like Tokyo and you read that they're literally closing schools, like shutting them down because there just aren't enough kids to fill the classrooms anymore.
Yeah, and then you flip the page.
Exactly. You flip the page to somewhere like Lagos or Kinshasa, and the population is practically doubling every single generation. It feels completely disconnected, like
Yeah,
two totally different planets.
it does. It definitely feels like chaos when you're just, living right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But if you zoom out, I mean, way out there is absolutely a pattern. It's actually almost spooky how consistent it is across the board.
And that is exactly the hook for today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at some fascinating demographic data and geographical models from our source material to ask a pretty massive question. Is the life and death of a nation just random? Or is there a specific, almost mathematical script that virtually every society follows?
It's the ultimate question that drives population geography, and the answer, surprisingly, is yes. There is a script.
A literal script.
Yeah, and it explains everything. I mean, from the Industrial Revolution to the current pension crisis we're seeing in Europe right now. And honestly, once you see this pattern, you really can't unsee it.
I love that. So for everyone listening, our mission today is to unpack the two heavy hitter frameworks from the source material that geographers actually use to predict the future of humanity.
The big ones.
Right. We're talking about the demographic transition model, which we'll just call the DTM, and its slightly grimmer, more biological cousin, the epidemiological transition model, or the ETM.
Yeah, they sound a little academic, I know. But these models are the actual literal reasons your local government decides to build a kindergarten today or a nursing home tomorrow.
Right.
They explain the exact mechanics of how we move from, farm-based survival all the way to becoming industrial powerhouses, and eventually to where some countries are right now actually shrinking in size.
That was the part that just completely blew my mind when I was reading through the research. The idea that we can predict almost exactly when a country will just start to shrink. So we're going to decode these stages of history. We're going to walk you through the entire life cycle of a civilization.
Think of it as a roadmap. If you know exactly where a country sits on this curve, you instantly understand its economy, its health challenges, and where it's headed in the future.
Let's jump right in then. We have to start with the big one, the demographic transition model, the DTM. Break it down for me. What is the actual engine driving this whole thing?
At its core, at its absolute simplest, the DTM is just a model explaining population changes based on economic development. That's it. It's a constant ongoing balancing act between two numbers.
Births and deaths.
Exactly, the birth rate and the death rate. The overarching theory here is that as a society gets richer, as it gets more developed, those two numbers shift in a very, very specific choreography.
And that dance, according to the sources, creates 5 distinct stages.
5 stages, yeah.
So let's do a little time travel. Take us all the way back to the beginning. Stage 1.
Okay, so stage 1 is what we call the high stationary stage. This is basically the starting line for humanity.
So we're talking way back.
Think completely pre-industrial, subsistence farming. In this world, the birth rate is incredibly high. An average family might have, 7, 8, or even 9 children.
But the wild thing is, the population isn't actually exploding at this point. It's completely flat. Why is that?
Because the death rate is just as high as the birth rate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You have constant famine, you have rampant disease, there's a complete lack of basic sanitation, and all these massive factors keep the human numbers down brutally. So those high birth rates, they just completely cancel out the high death rates.
So it's a balance, but it's a really dark one.
It's a stable population, but it is a volatile, incredibly painful kind of stability.
It's basically pure survival mode. And I remember reading in the notes about the farm context here, the idea that children are viewed completely differently in stage 1 than they are, say, today.
Oh, totally. That's the economic logic that drives that massive birth rate. On a subsistence farm, a child isn't just a mouth to feed. A child is a literal asset.
They're a worker.
They are hands to work the fields. You absolutely need a large family just to harvest enough food to literally survive the winter. But because child mortality is so devastatingly high in stage 1, you have to have all those kids just to ensure that a few of them actually make it to adulthood.
Right, to take over the farm eventually.
Exactly.
It's just a numbers game, but played with the highest stakes possible. Now, here's a detail from the text that actually really surprised me.
Hmm.
Because I assumed, there were still some remote tribes somewhere, or maybe some very underdeveloped nations that were still currently in stage 1 today.
Nope, none. And that is a really crucial takeaway for anyone listening. There are absolutely no sovereign entries in the world today that remain in stage 1.
That's crazy.
Every single nation on Earth has figured out how to lower their death rate at least a little bit.
Huh.
We have all collectively moved past that initial brutal survival phase.
That is just a wild thought. Humanity has basically completely graduated from stage 1. So obviously we moved to stage 2, the early expanding stage.
This is where the graph just goes completely vertical. This is the classic population explosion.
So what breaks that balance? What's the catalyst that changes everything?
Technology and basic health. Almost always, this coincides with the very early beginnings of industrialization. We finally figure out basic sanitation.
Like separating drinking water from the sewage.
Exactly. That alone is huge. Plus, we get better food supplies through some basic agricultural improvements, and maybe some very early organized healthcare starts popping up.
So the death rate basically just crashes. Suddenly, people aren't dying in these massive, horrific numbers.
They aren't, but, and here's the crucial friction that actually causes the population boom. The birth rate does not drop yet.
Right, because culture moves so much slower than technology.
Precisely. Cultural norms around family size are incredibly stubborn. They literally take generations to shift. So you have a society where people are still having 8 kids, because that's exactly what their parents did and their grandparents did.
It's what feels safe to them.
Right, it's tradition and security. But now, because of the slightly better living conditions, all 8 of those kids are actually surviving to adulthood.
High births, plummeting deaths. That massive gap right there is the explosion.
That gap is what demographers call the natural increase, and it can be staggering.
I really love the comparison the research makes here, because it shows how this model isn't just stuck in one time period. It spans across time. You can look at England in the mid-1700s, right at the absolute dawn of the factory era, and they were squarely in stage 2. But you can also look at parts of sub-Saharan Africa today.
And it perfectly shows that the model is about development, not just a historical timeline. 1750s England and 2024 Angola obviously look very different culturally.
Oh, completely.
They eat different food, they speak different languages, different clothes, but demographically, they are sitting in the exact same boat. They are facing the exact same structural pressures.
A massive youth bulge.
Yes. A huge demand for new schools, and a workforce that is growing much faster than the local economy can sometimes handle.
Okay, so eventually, though, the culture does catch up. The realization finally hits that you just don't need 8 kids anymore to survive.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the slowdown. Stage 3, the late expanding stage.
Right. So in stage 3, that stubborn birth rate finally begins to drop. The population is definitely still growing, but the foot is finally coming off the gas pedal. The curve starts to flatten out.
Now, I want to dig into the why here. Because it's not just that people wake up one day and magically decide to have fewer kids, right? The actual environment forces the decision.
It's the shift from the farm to the city. Urbanization is, historically speaking, the ultimate contraceptive.
Because the mass completely changes.
Completely changes. On the farm, a child is free labor. They're an asset. In a city apartment, a child is a massive liability.
It sounds so harsh.
It sounds terrible, but strictly economically, it's absolutely true. In the city, kids need clothes, they need school supplies, expensive food from a market.
And they definitely aren't bringing in a harvest.
No, they're not. They go from being a revenue generator to a massive expense.
So more hands to work literally becomes more mouths to feed.
Exactly. And on top of that, stage 3 is usually when you start seeing women entering the workforce in much larger numbers. Access to modern contraception improves, overall education levels rise, the opportunity cost of having a massive family just becomes way too high for most people.
You see this massive shift happening right now in places like Brazil or Mexico, right?
Yes, exactly.
So the initial explosion tapers off. And this feels like where a lot of the developing world is kind of settling right now. But then we hit the finish line. Or at least what we used to think was the finish line. Stage 4, low stationary.
This is where stability finally returns. You have really low birth rates and really low death rates. They cancel each other out again, just like they did back in stage 1.
But at a much better level.
A vastly more comfortable, longer living level.
So this would be the U.S., Canada, most of Europe.
Generally, yeah. The population basically stops growing, or it grows very, very slowly. And the whole societal anxiety shifts completely. It goes from How do we feed all these millions of kids to how in the world do we pay for all these retirees?
Right, because if you aren't having kids, the average age of your entire country just creeps up and up. You stop building elementary schools and you have to start hyper-focusing on pension funds and elder care.
Precisely. And for a really long time, geographers honestly thought this was the end of the line, just a nice, perfectly stable equilibrium. But then we started actually looking at the more recent data coming out of places like Germany, Italy, and especially Japan.
And enter stage 5, the natural decrease.
This is the big twist in the script. In stage 5, the birth rate drops below the death rate. People are having so few children, we're talking way below the replacement level of 2.1 kids per couple, that the next generation is literally physically smaller than the one that came before it.
And since the death rate is already basically as low as modern medicine can get it,
The population shrinks. It's just math. Japan is the absolute poster child for this right now. They are losing hundreds of thousands of people every single year purely because deaths outnumber births.
it's a crisis, right? I mean, from an economic standpoint.
Oh, it's a massive economic headache. Because we have built our entire global economy on this fundamental idea of growth, more people, more consumers, more young workers, we honestly haven't fully figured out how to run a capitalist economy in a shrinking country.
Because you have an upside-down pyramid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have this shrinking, stressed workforce trying desperately to support a massively swelling population of elderly people.
So we've literally gone from the farm to the factory to the high-rise, and now we're heading into decline. It's a very neat, tidy narrative. But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Is real life actually this clean? Does every single country follow this script perfectly?
Oh, absolutely not. The DTM is a fantastic framework for understanding the big picture, but it has some pretty glaring blind spots.
Let's critique it then. What's the biggest flaw in the model?
The biggest one by far is the Western bias. The model was originally built in the early 20th century by basically just looking backwards at the history of Europe and North America. So it completely assumes that every country in the world will industrialize in the exact same way that England or the US did.
Which is a huge assumption to make. I mean, England took 100 years to slowly crawl through stage 2. A developing nation today has access to antibiotics, smartphones, and global shipping markets on day 1.
Exactly. They can essentially speed run these demographic stages. Or, on the flip side, they might actually get stuck.
Stuck out.
Well, some countries see their death rates drop entirely due to international aid. Modern medicine arriving from abroad in crates. But their internal economy doesn't actually industrialize. So the birth rate just stays sky high.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they get trapped in stage 2 for much, much longer than Europe ever did. The model just doesn't always account well for that kind of external intervention.
And there's another variable the model ignores entirely, which I think is absolutely huge in the modern world: migration.
Oh, it is the absolute elephant in the room. The DTM strictly calculates natural increase. That's just local births minus local deaths. It treats every single country like a totally closed box.
But borders aren't closed, people move.
Right. You can be a firmly stage 5 country like Germany, where physically more people are dying than being born, but your overall population is still growing on paper. Why? Immigration.
So the pure math model says you're shrinking, but reality on the ground says you're growing.
Exactly. Migration completely overrides the so-called stages in a lot of modern nations. It's a mechanism the original demographers just didn't factor in heavily enough, mostly because people just didn't move as easily back then as they do globally today.
Okay, so that perfectly covers the quantity of life. How many people are actually here? But we need to pivot to the quality of life, or, maybe more morbidly, the actual causes of death.
Yes, this is the sister framework we mentioned earlier, the epidemiological transition model, or ETM.
Right, so the DTM asks how many people, the ETM asks what?
What is actually killing us? And just like the demographic model, it evolves in distinct stages that perfectly match up with economic development. It's basically the overarching story of our ongoing battle against nature.
Let's run through this parallel track then. Stage 1 of the ETM perfectly correlates with that stage 1 survival mode in the DTM, right?
It does. This is the stage of famine and pestilence. And it sounds completely medieval because it basically is.
We're talking the big ones here: the Black Plague, malaria, smallpox.
The absolute primary killers are infectious and parasitic diseases. Nature is just attacking you constantly from all sides. Life expectancy is incredibly low. We're talking maybe 30 years on average.
And population growth is jagged, right?
Yeah.
It's not a smooth, slow lineup.
It's extremely volatile. You might have 10 really good years of steady growth, and then a plague sweeps through a region and wipes out all that growth in a month. It's a constant, incredibly violent battle against bugs and bacteria.
But then we hit stage 2, receding pandemics. This matches the population explosion phase. What is the actual hero here?
Yeah, the hero is pure public health. We finally figure out sanitation.
Which is huge.
It's everything. We stop drinking the exact same water where we use the bathroom. That is the big breakthrough. We understand basic nutrition so much better. Life expectancy suddenly jumps from 30 to maybe 50 years.
But the notes mention a very specific lingering threat here. It's not just all clear skies and health immediately.
No, definitely not. Because stage 2 is usually that period of early, messy industrialization. You suddenly have these incredibly crowded, dirty, rapidly growing factory cities. So while the bubonic plague might be totally gone, you get massive, devastating outbreaks of cholera or tuberculosis right in the city slums.
So it's a transition period where the physical infrastructure just hasn't caught up to the new population density.
Exactly. The cities are growing faster than the sewers are.
Then comes stage 3, the era of degenerative diseases. Now, degenerative sounds inherently bad.
It sounds awful, but honestly, in the grand context of human history, it's actually a massive luxury. It's a clear sign of success.
Because you actually lived long enough for your body to fall apart.
It's exactly it. In stage 1, you just didn't live long enough to ever get heart disease. You died of measles when you were 5. In stage 3, you have survived the bacteria. Now you're mostly dying from your own body just wearing out.
Things like heart disease, cancer, strokes.
Right. Or what we sometimes call human-created diseases.
Lifestyle choices, basically.
Yeah. As we get richer as a society, our diets totally change. We become way more sedentary. We essentially stop dying from hunger, and we start dying from excess. Smoking, obesity, chronic stress.
This is where I feel like modern medicine really starts to flex its muscles, though. Because we move right into stage 4, delayed degenerative diseases.
And really note the word delayed there. We definitely still get cancer. We absolutely still get heart attacks. Those are still the main things that kill us. But thanks to things like chemotherapy, complex bypass surgeries, and daily statins, we actually survive the first attack.
We just keep pushing the finish line back further and further.
We extend average life expectancy well into the 80s.
Mm.
This is where most of the Western world is sitting today. We actively manage chronic conditions that would have been an absolute death sentence even 50 years ago.
Right, like a heart attack in 1950 was just fatal.
Almost always. Today, you get a quick stent put in and you go home in a few days. It's miraculous.
But, and there's always a but, just like with the other model, there is a proposed stage 5 in the ETM. And honestly, reading the notes, this one sounds exactly like the plot of a sci-fi horror movie.
It does. It is the reemergence of infectious diseases.
They would just go backwards.
That is the big fear in public health right now. The working theory is that we might actually lose the ground we fought so hard to gain. The bugs are literally fighting back.
How does that even happen?
The absolute biggest driver is antibiotic resistance. We have used antibiotics so heavily, not just in humans, but massively in factory farming, that the bacteria are rapidly evolving to beat them.
Superbugs.
Yeah. We're already seeing superbugs in hospitals that our standard go-to medicines simply cannot kill anymore.
And I assume globalization plays a really big role here, too. Just the fact that I can be sitting in New York today and be walking around Hong Kong tomorrow.
It is a literal superhighway for pathogens. Think about stage 1. A plague took years to slowly crawl across a single continent. Today, a brand new virus can cross an ocean in 12 hours on a commercial flight. Plus, as our growing populations push further into new, wild environments, cutting down deep forests, we're coming into much closer contact with zoonotic diseases.
Which are viruses jumping from animals to humans.
Exactly.
So the actual nightmare scenario for stage 5 is that global life expectancy actually starts to drop again for the first time in modern history.
It's very possible. If our core medicine stopped working, we could be facing 19th century mortality rates but living in a 21st century world. It's called the post-antibiotic era, and it honestly scares public health officials more than almost anything else out there.
That is genuinely terrifying. But it brings me to the big so what of this whole conversation. We've looked at all these charts. We've gone through the stages. If you're listening to this right now, or maybe if you're a local government official, why does this actually matter? What do you do with this specific info?
It is the ultimate civic planning tool. It literally dictates where every single dollar of your tax money should go.
Give me a concrete example of that.
Okay, think about basic infrastructure. If your country or your region is currently in stage 2 of the DTM, you have a massive youth bulge. If you don't aggressively build schools, train thousands of teachers, and create entry-level jobs, you are going to have massive youth unemployment and guaranteed social unrest. You need to be pouring concrete for classrooms right now.
But if you're sitting in stage 5, like Japan or parts of Italy,
Then building a massive new elementary school is a total waste of municipal money. It will just sit there empty. You need to be heavily subsidizing nursing homes and training geriatric nurses instead. You need to be urgently fixing the pension system. If you misread your demographic stage, you end up building the completely wrong society for the people who actually live there.
and on the health side, with the ETM.
It tells you exactly what enemy to fight. If you are in stage 2, you really don't need a billion-dollar high-tech oncology center yet. You need functional sewers, clean drinking water, and millions of cheap malaria nets.
Right.
But if you're in stage 4, malaria nets are totally useless to you. You need massive cardiac research funding and advanced oncology wards.
So it prevents totally mismatched resources.
It tries to anyway. But, and I definitely have to add this final huge grain of salt here, the ETM often completely ignores one massive factor that cuts right across every single stage we talked about.
What's that?
Extreme poverty. The model mostly looks at national averages, but you can easily have a stage 4 country, super wealthy, advanced robotic medicine that still has isolated pockets of people dying from preventable stage 1 diseases.
Simply because they can't afford the modern cure.
Exactly. The ETM is highly focused on biology and national economics. But very often, the main reason people die young isn't that the country lacks the medical technology, it's that the individual person lacks the money to access it. You can't just look at a demographic chart and assume every single citizen is equally safe. You always have to look at actual access.
That is a really crucial nuance to remember. The national average just never tells the whole, complete story.
Never, not in any country.
So to kind of wrap this all up for you listening, we seem to be on this incredible trajectory. We move from the family farm to the crowded city. We move from having huge families to very small ones. We move from dying of the plague to dying of old age. Unless, of course, the superbugs get us first.
Yeah. It's ultimately a story of conquering nature and then having to frantically manage all the complex consequences of that victory.
I really want to leave everyone with one final thought, though. We talked earlier about that Western bias in the source material, the idea that these specific models are just a recording of what already happened in Europe and America.
Right. The flawed assumption that the West is the standard script for everyone else.
But the world is changing so incredibly fast right now. Developing nations today are adopting AI, remote work, renewable energy infrastructure in ways the West never ever did during its own industrial phase. They aren't just following the old path. They're actually innovating on top of it.
They're leapfrogging the old industrial steps entirely.
Exactly.
Okay.
So here is the question to chew on. If the classic models are basically just a history book of the West, what happens if the rest of the world just decides to write a totally new chapter? What if they don't follow the old script at all?
What does a stage 6 even look like that we haven't even begun to imagine yet?
That is definitely the question that will keep the demographers up at night. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the mathematics of our lives with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next one.